just how strong is Monkey D. Luffy? While watching my way through the East Blue Saga, I kept on asking that question. In order to solve that mystery a little bit, we're going to look at 5 examples of Luffy's strength and durability, with each one getting progressively more extreme than the last. Let's set sail. The first instance we'll look at is from the Baratier arc, and it focuses on Luffy's durability. While sailing towards the Baratier, the Straw Hats encounter a marine vessel and the government ship fires a cannonball at the Going Merry. While the cannonball was clearly going to miss the Merry, Luffy still decides to block the shot. Thanks to the Gum Gum fruit, Luffy is made of rubber, so he's able to catch the cannonball and fire it back at the Marines. Well, at least that was his plan, I think. So in this instance, how much force is Luffy feeling while catching the cannonball? The first thing to figure out is going to be the speed of the cannonball. However, due to the animation of the scene, I decided to just go with the average speed of a cannonball instead. In this article by Dr. A.R. Collins, he uses some math to model the ballistics of a smoothbore cannon. Using the data from this article, I ran some numbers. I should state that I went with the highest numbers provided in the article. Typically, when I'm faced with a range of numbers, I like to go at the middle of that range so I don't over-exaggerate things. But due to the cannonball seemingly moving at light speed in the One Piece episode, I figured the highest numbers were more fair in this situation. For the record, the exact number I went with was a muzzle velocity of 1700 feet per second. The Going Merry is a Caravel class ship, and while I couldn't find specific dimensions for the Going Merry, I was able to find reference points for the size of Caravel class ships. Typically, these types of ships will have a width of about 20 feet. This is important because we need to know how far back Luffy is stretching when he stops the cannonball in order to figure out the forces at play here. The longer it takes for something to stop, the less force is being exerted in one specific moment. Think about those trampoline parks. When you jump off into one of the foam pits, you're completely fine. Now imagine taking that exact same jump just without the foam. You'd come to a much more sudden stop at the bottom of that pit, and you'd likely leave with a broken leg. The same is true with Luffy stopping the cannonball. The forces would be much greater if Luffy were to deflect the cannonball instantly rather than slowly stopping it like he does. In the scene, we can see that Luffy starts on one side of the Going Merry, and he stretches all the way off the other side, pretty far. Using the size of Caravel class ships and some estimations, we can estimate that Luffy stretches about 30 feet while stopping the cannonball. Using all of this information and an impact calculator, I got us some numbers. In this instance, Luffy would be feeling a maximum of 426,000 newtons of force. That 426,000 newtons isn't the total amount of force during his stop, but rather it's the peak of the force that he'd feel while stopping the cannonball. If you're anything like most people, with me definitely included in that group, big Newton numbers really don't mean that much to you, and so I found a car crash calculator that could help put those numbers in a bit better perspective for us. Shout out to Omni Calculator for having so many useful calculators. 426,000 newtons of force is the same average amount of force that Luffy would feel if he were in a car accident where the car was going 115 miles per hour. And if Luffy was buckled up, of course. Buckle up. Even with a seatbelt on, a car crash at this speed would very likely kill you. That all being said, to anyone who's actually watched One Piece, it's not that surprising that Luffy could take a blow like this. After all, Luffy's rubber. So let's go ahead and move on to some more surprising examples. The next moment we're going to break down is from episode 5. At this point, Luffy is facing off against the Buggy Pirates and he's tied up in a cage. An enraged Buggy the Clown uses his Chop Chop power to fly a knife at Luffy's face. Luffy catches the knife with his teeth and then breaks said knife with said teeth. I've actually done most of the legwork when it comes to figuring out how much Luffy would need to bite down with in order to break a blade like he does, due to my work on a previous video. That video was focused around Yor Forger from Spy X Family, and in that video I covered a scene where Yor snaps a blade with her bare hands. In that video, I got all of my numbers based on the properties of A2 steel, and I think those properties will fit here again, because A2 steel is also used to make combat knives. We have no way of knowing what type of steel Buggy's knives are made out of, so when it comes to picking a specific type of steel, we are just going to have to pick. So, A2 steel it is. A2 steel!
I choose you!
A2 steel has a shear strength of 65 KSI, and this means that Luffy would need to be biting with at least 65,000 pounds of force per square inch in order to snap the blade with his teeth like he does. Buggy's blade definitely seems to be wider than 1 inch. However, scaling across One Piece is honestly whack, so I'm just gonna go with the 65,000 pounds of force needed here. Just keep in mind the numbers needed to really do this are likely going to be bigger than the numbers I'm about to present to you. My main reasoning for this is I have some crazy numbers coming up later, so there's no need to artificially pump this one up. For a more understandable representation of 65,000 pounds of force, let's take a look at an alligator.
No, oh, there's a good boy.
According to eriezoo.org, alligators have an average bite force of 2,000 pounds per square inch. A normal human, for context, has a bite force of around 120 pounds per square inch. So, Luffy has a bite force at least 32 times greater than that of an alligator. Or maybe Buggy just buys really shitty knives. One important note that I want all of you to remember is that I am not a physicist or a material scientist. I'm just a person on the internet who likes to try to figure out these anime moments. If I ever misunderstand some of the science, please understand that I'm doing my best and that mistakes are not intentional. If you catch a mistake in one of my videos, leave a comment about it so I can learn from that mistake and be better in the future, and even go back and fix the mistake if it's big enough. Anyway, the third scene I want to look at is one that most of you were probably expecting to see, but you probably weren't expecting to see it at least until the end of the video. My original plan for this video was to end by talking about this moment, but there were just 2 other moments that blew this one out of the water in terms of durability and feats of strength. The moment we're going to look at right now is Luffy's Gum Gum battle axe against Arlong during the Arlong Park arc. Try saying that 10 times fast. Arlong Park arc, 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 Arlong Park arc. Real quick, Arlong Park lived up to the hype. I loved that arc, and I actually got super emotional at the end when the spirit of Nami's mom pushes her out the door to officially join the Straw Hats. 10 out of 10 arc. Anyway, Arlong is a very powerful fishman who's been bringing death and destruction across the East Blue. In particular, he's held Nami's hometown and Nami herself captive for years. This all leads to the Straw Hats taking on Arlong for Nami's sake. Honestly, there were a dozen different moments from this arc I could have broken down, but I think we'd all like to see a breakdown on the battle axe finisher the most. In the final fight, Luffy smashes through Arlong Park with his foot and brings it down onto an attacking Arlong. This sends the fishman through floor after floor and eventually has him crashing into stone ground below, ending the fight. In order to determine the kind of power that Luffy's putting out here, I thought it would be best to focus around Arlong's final impact into the ground. Arlong smashes into the stone at the end of the fight, and in one of my other previous videos, I covered a situation that was also kind of similar to this one. Luckily, the previous method I used can also be applied here. In one of my previous videos on Toji Fushiguro from JJK, I used a calculator from Purdue University to help determine the power of Toji's kick. Go watch that video after this one, by the way. This same crater calculator can be used to help determine some of the details about Arlong's final impact. Using this frame here, I used Arlong and his height to estimate the size of his impact crater. Using this method, I got a crater diameter of about 24.4 feet. With that number, I can find a comparable impact that would create a similarly sized crater. I do, however, have to use kind of a weird way to get that result. We're missing some of the vital information needed to make the calculator work, like the final impact velocity, and so I had to get a little bit creative to figure that detail out. For a couple of the missing factors, I just made some reasonable assumptions. For one, I assumed that the world of One Piece likely has the same gravity as Earth, and then I also assumed that Arlong wouldn't be that much denser than a normal human. For the final impact velocity variable, I did take a different approach though. Whenever you run this calculator, it spits out 2 different answers. One, it spits out the size of the crater created by such an impact, and second, it gives us the amount of joules that the object would have to impact the ground with. We already know know the size of the final impact crater thanks to my estimations from before, and so we can kind of just guess for the final impact velocity until we get a resulting output that matches that crater size we already calculated. I already had all of the other needed pieces of information to make the calculator work except that impact velocity, and I already knew part of the answer. So I just had to simply plug in different impact velocities until we got a crater that matched the size of the crater that Arlong creates. This is like one of those algebra problems where you already have the answer, but then you need to figure out a variable that's on the other side of the equation. The final resulting impact velocity was 0.11 kilometers a second. In English, this means that in order for Arlong's impact to create a crater of this size, Arlong would have to impact the ground at nearly 246 miles an hour. This is likely far faster than what we visually see in the anime, but that's also not the most important detail here. Finding that impact velocity that creates a crater of this size was all in service so we could figure out the amount of energy needed to create that crater. This is the second half of the calculator's output. Arlong would have to impact the ground with 6,880,000 joules of energy in order to create a crater the same size that he actually does. That means that Arlong would have to impact the ground with the same amount of energy provided from 3.3 pounds of TNT. That doesn't sound like a lot, and you're probably right, it's really not, but it's also definitely not nothing. Especially when we remember that this is just Luffy kicking Arlong really hard.
For a 3-year-old child.
For a reference point, let's take a look at a clip from a Mr. Beast video. In the video, Lamborghini versus World's Largest Shredder, the Mr. Beast crew blows up some safes. In this frame here, we can see on the explosives box that it says there is 1.25 pounds of explosives in the box. Jimmy also directly calls it TNT. However, I will point out that the box does say C4. We're trusting Jimmy on this one. Anyway, assuming that the weight of the box and Jimmy can be trusted, then Arlong would be hitting the ground with 2.6 times more energy than Mr. Beast's first safe explosion in the video. While the battle axe wasn't as an insane of a result as I was expecting, it definitely surpasses any possibility of being humanly possible. This also isn't the final Arlong appearance in this video. We'll be back to talk more about Arlong in the very last clip that we break down. For now, let's move back to the Baratier arc.
Alright, motherfuckers, let's get the elephant out of the room. Yeah, I'm saying Don Creed the whole time. What's my excuse? Well, I think it's because I watched the dub, not sub, so I never saw the name written, and I guess I just heard Don Creed instead of Don Krieg. So my bad there. Hope you're not too annoyed every time I say Don Creed for the next 4 minutes or so.
Near the end of the arc, a fierce pirate attacks the Baratier. Don Creed. I liked this arc. Regardless of my enjoyment of the arc, Luffy's gonna fight him. During their fight, Don Creed breaks out his spear. Some of his crew state directly that the spear easily weighs over a full ton. This is important information for later. Another important note about this fight is that Sanji states that Luffy has already lost a lot of blood and he looks super tired. So keep in mind that the insane numbers we're about to see aren't even a full strength Luffy. Don Creed swings the heavy spear at Luffy and Luffy blocks it by pressing onto the blade of the spear in order to stop the attack. He does just that and he almost instantly stops the spear. There's no slowing of the spear attack or anything of that sort. Luffy instantly stops it. Focusing back on Don Creed's weapon, 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. The crew directly states that it's easily over a ton, so I went with 2,500 pounds for the weight of his spear. This has insane implications for Don Creed's strength, but we're not going to get into that in this video. Maybe I'll make a short about it. Wink wink. I used Don Creed's height of 8 feet and a few different frames in order to roughly estimate the length of his spear. This is an important detail because we need to know how far the spear travels before Luffy stops it. Those estimates told me that Don Creed's spear is about 86 inches or around 7 feet long. With the spear's length, we can figure out how far the spear travels during the attack, which came out to be about 5.5 feet. Don Creed's attack also takes about 1 full second before it reaches Luffy. With those 2 pieces of information and some simple math, we can determine that the spear is moving at 3.5 miles an hour when it reaches Luffy. That's not that crazy. What makes this crazy is the weight of the spear combined with Luffy instantly stopping it. Remember when I brought up those foam pits and trampoline parks? For that very first example, Luffy was taking the foam pit approach. Luffy slowly stopped the cannonball over a decent time and distance. However, when it comes to stopping Don Creed's spear, he's taking the cement ground approach. An instant stop. This factor, combined with the absolute weight of the spear, takes this scene from very impressive to downright superhuman. Keep all of that in mind while we look at these upcoming numbers. Throwing those numbers into an acceleration calculator tells us that when Luffy stops the spear instantly, that gives the spear a deceleration of negative 5,500 feet per second squared. For the record, that is an extremely fast deceleration. Using this deceleration, we can apply that to a force calculator and come to learn that Luffy would need to be exerting around 4,191,000 newtons of force to stop such a heavy spear as fast as he stops that spear. That mass amount of newtons converts to 942,000 pounds of force, which further converts to 427 tons of force. In this video here, the creators are using a 150 ton-pound hydraulic press to crush a much smaller hydraulic press. In order for Luffy to stop the spear the way that he does, he would need to be exerting about 3 times the amount of force that this hydraulic press is exerting on the smaller hydraulic press. Nearly 3 times the force. 3 times! This is an extreme level of force from Luffy, but also not that surprising when we consider all of the moments I left out of this video. Luffy can smash steel, crack concrete, and he can even shatter that subscribe button. How about you try that, huh? It's time to talk about the most out-of-the-world moment I looked at for this video. Let's talk about Arlong's bite. Luffy is bitten by Arlong a few times during his fight with him, and even the most severe bite doesn't leave too much damage on Luffy. Sure, Luffy states that Arlong could have ripped his arm off, but Arlong never does. Obviously. We have like 1,000 episodes to go. Luffy can't lose an arm. Luffy taking these bites might not seem that crazy until we consider a scene from a few episodes before. The Marines fire a cannonball at Arlong and he simply catches the cannonball in his mouth and then shatters it in an instant. Luffy is taking bites from jaws that can shatter an iron cannonball. So, just how much force can Arlong bite with? In this video here, we can see a small iron ball being crushed by a hydraulic press. One important note to take away from this video is the fact that the iron ball never shatters, and in fact it hardly even cracks at the very end. Iron is pretty damn strong. Iron doesn't simply shatter in most normal situations like we see with Arlong biting through the cannonball. The key to solving this situation is compressive strength. Compressive strength is the strength that a material has to resist compressive forces. Once a certain object's compressive strength is surpassed, it will start to crack or at the very least deform. Using a data sheet for iron, we can see that its compressive strength ranges from 16 to 32 KSI. That's quite a wide range, so I went with the middle of that range and used 24 KSI for the calculations. What that 24 KSI means is that Arlong would need to bite with at least 24,000 pounds of force per square inch. One very important note about that number is that is 24,000 pounds of force per square inch on the cannonball. This is not the overall amount of force that Arlong would need to bite with. That's what we're about to figure out. Another important note to bring up before we get into the big numbers is that these numbers are actually probably less than what's actually needed to do what Arlong does. He shatters it with such speed and intensity that is bound to increase the real numbers needed to break a cannonball like that. In order to really find out those final details, we need to figure out the size of the cannonball. The One Piece wiki states that Arlong's nose is over a foot long. Honestly, it doesn't seem that way in most scenes, but we're gonna trust the wiki on this one. To be precise, I went with 13 inches because the wiki does state that it's over a foot long. Anyway, I used this frame here and Arlong's nose as a reference point in order to calculate the size of the cannonball. In the end, the cannonball has a diameter of around 14.7 inches. This means that the area of the cannonball would be 679 inches. Now that we know the cannonball's area and the iron's compressive strength, strength, we can figure out how much force Arlong would need to be biting with in order to shatter the cannonball. Arlong's bite would need to contain around 16,292,808 pounds of force in order to break through the cannonball like he does. Again, I gotta reiterate that this is a conservative estimate. According to that data sheet, some iron can have a compressive strength all the way up to 32 KSI. Also, Arlong does all of this in almost an instant, so that is bound to increase the amount of force needed to crack this cannonball. Now that we more fully understand the potential behind Arlong's bite, we can actually understand just how strong Luffy is when he takes bites from Arlong. When Luffy's bit by Arlong, it would be like he's being bit by a bear trap. Oh, and that bear trap would have 49 blue whales on top of it pressing the spikes into Luffy's arm. The fact that Luffy is able to take so many bites from the fish man just really proves how superhuman he is. It makes sense that he could take a bite or two. After all, Luffy is rubber. He does always bounce back. Thank you so much for watching my latest How Superhuman is X video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't, I'm open to any feedback in the comments. If you have another character you'd like me to take a look at, also put that in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss when I check out solo leveling in a month or two. We'll catch you next time. See ya.